Yeah.
Welcome.
Hello.
We are here tonight again with the esteemed scholar and author St. Joshi, who is joining us again from Seattle to discuss his. I'm going to go ahead and say the word monumental new text about the history of atheism. This one is called "The Downfall of God." Is it called a history of atheism in the West? St. Is that what
That's
that's?
correct. Yes.
Okay, that's what it's called. I
And
don't know why that title's messing that title up a little bit.
right.
But Mr. Joshi has also written a lot of other books on this particular topic, which is I feel should be of interest to everybody at this point in time, especially. But his other titles are God's Defenders, What They Believe and Why They Are Wrong. He's also edited a volume called Agnosticism, a reader. And I believe there's several other books too, St. that are probably not coming to mind right now, but you've done a lot of research on this topic over the years. And we're excited that you got word today that this book is just now going to be published soon. Is that correct?
Well, soon is a relative term. I believe the announcement is for November, which will be upon us sooner than we think, I suppose.
Yeah, soon enough.
But this book, as you can imagine, has been in the works for a long time. I started it in early 2021, mostly because I felt that was a good time to begin. We were sort of kind of coming out of COVID. I knew that I needed access to a good university library, and I have an excellent one here at the University of Washington where I can check books out. And
Right.
at that time, I'll tell you, you could not actually set foot in the library because they were still worried about COVID and whatnot. Okay, I understand that.
Right.
So what you had to do is go online, type in or flag the books that you wanted pulled from the shelves to check out. They would check them out for you on your card. You typed in your library card, and they would bring them out in a paper bag and place them on a table right outside one of the doors of the building, and you'd come and pick it up. No touching, no nothing. So that worked for a while, and then finally they did open up the library, because I tell you, I don't know about you, but as a researcher, I like to roam. I like to roam in a library because sometimes you don't exactly know what you're looking for. And sometimes you come upon things that you didn't expect, and this has happened all the time. So I was certainly glad when the library actually opened. But I will have to say that I've been working on whatever for the last 40, 50 years, almost 50 years. I can't believe it. I started very young as a teenager, but the point is that this book, the 2 volumes, assuming the second volume comes out in due course of time, to my mind is my intellectual accomplishment. I mean, this is what I may or may not be remembered for. Maybe I'll remember it for my Lovecraft biography, which I think is a good piece of work, or my history of supernatural fiction, which is called Unutterable Horror. But in this book, I really wrestle with a lot of topics I think that are of supreme importance to people at large, whereas stuff in weird fiction may not be.
Right. Well, St. Kate and I were talking about this, but maybe you should talk a little bit about what you kind of set out to achieve with writing this book and introducing people to, I guess, introducing readers afresh to the theme of atheism, because they may not be familiar with these perspectives. People who have worked to overturn certain things politically, people who have tried to make advances in academia and so forth. And maybe you should talk a little bit about how you got into taking on this project.
Well, okay, as you suggest, I have been working on this for a long time, and I will tell you, one of my major inspirations going way back is H.P. Lovecraft. There is no doubt that he triggered my interest in atheism when I first read his letters as a teenager, in the late 70s, I believe, or mid 70s. Right. I loved his fiction, of course, and I started, being a scholar on his fiction. But then when I got those letters, I said, "Oh my God, this guy was a real brain," and he was a very ardent atheist and made really compelling arguments for that. And so I have really sort of used Lovecraft as a springboard for my own researches into atheism. Now, what this book does is obviously it does try to portray the development of atheistic thought, but more generally, it tries to show how religion became so central to human existence from primitive times, insofar as we can tell how that happened. I mean, every primitive race that we know of going, back to the dawn of time has been religious in some fashion or other. And then the Orthodox religions emerged out of polytheism in Greco-Roman times. But what my book does is trace how the influence or impact of religion has declined, not systematically, but sporadically over the course of the last 2 or 3 millennia. Because quite frankly, atheism, in the most literal sense, disbelief in God, is not a common trait even today. There are very few people who openly consider themselves atheists. Maybe some of them are scared to do so. Who knows? Who knows what? But it's still a minority view. What is not a minority situation is the demise, I would say demise, the decline of religion in many aspects of society from Greco-Roman times to today. And that is the story that I try to tell in what I hope is an accessible, non-academic manner. And I like to think that I tell a pretty compelling story.
Right.
So you said that this is the first volume of 2. So you could start chronologically. And
I
so
do.
what
I
is some
do
of your
start.
earliest
Well, I
examples?
have a chapter on again, there have been psychological and other types anthropological studies on what we believe to be the religion of primitive peoples, from the Paleolithic or Neolithic ages. They probably started out with what is called animism, the belief that natural forces were animate, like trees or rivers, because they grew and they flowed down. So they had to, primitive peoples probably believed that these were animated by some sort of entity in them that caused them to proceed. They had no notion of natural progression of these kinds of events. So I start with that, and then I go into the earliest religious beliefs. Egyptian religion probably came first, as early as 6000 BC. Then into a lot of the religions of the Middle East, whether it be Assyria or Persia or Judaism or any number of others in the Middle East during the fourth, third, second millenniums. Then I start with the Greco-Roman civilization, and I have to say that is a very comfortable situation for me, because as an undergraduate and graduate student at Brown and Princeton, I studied classical literature, classical history, classical philosophy, and so I was glad to reacquaint myself with a lot of the stuff that I had learned and forgotten since then, because of course I didn't use it very much, but now it all came rushing back. I still have a lot of my old books of texts and scholarship in my shed.
Right.
I dug them out and I was thrilled to read them again. And I said, oh yes, it's amazing how much I had forgotten about all this stuff. And of course I read new work as well. And then of course you get to Christianity, and that's a whole nother thing. And that takes up about the second half of this volume, and basically the entirety of volume 2,
Right.
showing how, again, Christianity flowered in the Middle Ages, took a hit during the Renaissance, if you know what I mean, really took a hit during the 18th century with the Enlightenment, and since then, whether you like it or not, has been steadily on the decline as an influence in government, in law, in literature, in art, music, philosophy. I tackle all these issues, or at least I try to. It's a huge subject, and sometimes I have to be a little more condensed than I would like. There's so much to cover, but I felt the need to do this sort of all-encompassing view, because so far as I understand, nobody's done it before.
Right.
That's and I had the time and the leisure to do it. I mean, there have been single volume histories of atheism or single volume histories of free thought. They're fine as far as they go, but you need to go really in depth to see how this whole thing has developed over the centuries.
Now, ST, is this an academic publisher that took this book, or this is
No, I don't believe so. Pitchstone Publishing is one of the leading atheist publishers out there, and they
okay.
publish a lot of popular books as well, but
Okay.
books that are also academically rigorous, to be sure, but they're
Yeah.
not scholarly as far as I understand it.
Right.
or academic. They are scholarly without being academic, and that's what I like to think my book is. I've always tried to do that. I published a lot with university presses back in the day, and I said, okay, well, I've done that. I don't need to prove myself in the academic field. And this book, I have to say, I did query some academic publishers, some university presses, and both basically their reaction was, my God, this is a big book, especially the whole 2-volume thing, and basically they simply didn't have the resources to do it. I mean, this book is going to be, expensive to produce, and I was very lucky that my old colleague at Pitchstone Publishing says, yes, we'll do it, we'll get it out somehow, and hope for the best.
That's great. Did you want to ask anything else before
Oh, you can.
Okay, well, no, that's all right.
Yeah.
So I guess another question is, I know that you really wanted to get this out. You've been working on this book for a long time, but there's a real importance to bring this topic back into the discussion that's going on just in America, especially, I think, right now, because I think this book, I mean, your writing is so clear and concise to me. I think if people will read the book, I believe they'll get an understanding of how, this is theism has become a serious political constraint, if you will. Much more so than just a topic for, theoretical discussion or what have you. So this book should actually, I think, open the conversation a little bit more as to how much that these concepts are still believed in or disbelieved in, as it were today.
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't flatter myself to think that this is going to have a major impact on immediate political discussion, but you never know. I think what people will come away with if they read all 2 volumes, all 400,000 words of this book, is basically the staggering decline of the Christian religion in particular. What happened was, when Christianity basically took over the Roman Empire in the early 4th century CE, it became what I call a totalizing religion. What I mean by that is it affected every single aspect of human life, as I mentioned: government, law, philosophy, politics, literature, everything. I mean, you could not escape the role of Christianity in every single aspect of human life. And for a millennium, that was fairly, it was basically unquestioned. In my study of the medieval era, however, I do note that there were controversies even then, at a time when you think that Christianity was in complete domination. Nobody questioned it. Well, people did. Theologians themselves were uncertain about all manner of things, and there were various heresies that sprung up and that were condemned by the Orthodox Church. There were schisms within the church. There was a time I can't remember exactly when, I think sometime in the 14th century, when there were 3 different individuals calling themselves the Pope.
Oh, what?
3 different people for a short period of time. But it just goes to show that there was a certain kind of chaos going on. What happened, I'll talk about this. What happened at that time was that theologians such as Saint Anselm, Thomas Aquinas, of course, preeminently, and Averroes, and a number of other thinkers, seemed to think that revelation was not enough. That is to say, the belief that the Bible was a divinely inspired book, basically dictated by God, by the inspired people who had written it, whoever they may have been. That rationale was not enough to justify belief. So they set about coming up with philosophical justifications belief, the so-called cosmological theory, the first cause theory. I mean, there are all kinds of different things. In my humble estimation, they are all easily refuted, and I do so in my book. But it's interesting that they themselves felt the need to do that. They needed to justify Christian belief intellectually rather than just accepting the Bible as a sacred text.
Right.
And then when the Renaissance came along, everything kind of, blew up in their face, chiefly for two different reasons. One, the rediscovery of ancient literature, that is to say, pagan literature from Greco-Roman times. That literature, had been largely suppressed because it was pagan, it was heretical. Orthodox Christians in the medieval era regarded the Greco-Roman gods not so much as false gods, but as demons.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of strange,
Yeah.
but that's what they believe. And so the rediscovery of these ancient texts of a pre-Christian era, largely, showed this vibrant society, full of intellectual and aesthetic accomplishment. I mean, Homer and Virgil and Plato and all these writers working in well before the Christian era, a lively, thriving civilization without Christianity. And so some people said, well,
what does this mean?
why don't we try this? There were still not very many people who actually, became atheists. I mean, that's still vanishingly minority view.
Yeah.
But that's one aspect. The second aspect that happened was the rediscovery, I shouldn't say rediscovery, but the development of scientific thought, spawned in part by the rediscovery of the ancient texts, particularly Aristotle and some of the other of the sort of the Greek scientists who did some early work in that field. Galen, the medicine writer.
Mm-hmm.
This led to people like Copernicus and Kepler and Galileo making really striking advances in scientific knowledge that ultimately undermined Christian belief.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a question, something that David and I go back and forth about a lot is, so you've cataloged kind of this history of atheism, and you've seen the waves of stronger religious belief in a society, and then, like you were just saying, the Renaissance. Do you see us in the West entering another more theocratic era, or do you see us moving more towards the secularism? Because David, because we do have the things with Roe v. Wade being repealed, and the book banning that is going on en masse in America right now. And
so theocracy or secularism?
No, I don't. In the United States, at least, the chances of any sort of genuine theocracy happening are extremely small. Again, this is where a very long historical view is helpful, because again, most people, even most well-educated people, have no conception of how totalizing, as I said, Christianity was for a millennium and a half, from basically 300 CE to 1800. The Enlightenment really destroyed so many pillars of Christian thought, and they could never be revived in the same way. I have remarked in various writings, for example, in my column in Free Inquiry, that what we're seeing here in the last several decades is kind of the galvanic twitching of a dying entity. I mean, let's be honest, we're living in a secular age, and
right.
These little things like overturning of Roe v. Wade amount to nothing. I mean, they're serious, but in the long haul, they amount to nothing, and they will not stop the spread of secularism.
Right. And I think your book is probably going to go into, I'm sure at some point you dip into the reasons as to why this is so important for people to understand that, theism is not safe. It's not, it doesn't create a healthy environment for people, because I mean, especially not under Christianity, because it's so condemning of human behavior and human action. And they certainly don't condone free thought or free, thinking.
Absolutely. Well, okay. I have in this book, the first volume, two pretty long chapters on Greek and then Roman civilization and Greek and Roman religion. I like to think they're interesting, and I think they will be interesting to people who don't know much about that field, because what you learn there is that those religions were not totalizing in my definition. they occupied an important place, to be sure, in the society, but the Greeks in particular left moralizing where it should have been left to the philosophers.
Mm-hmm.
Greco-Roman religion had no specific moral principle that you were obliged to obey.
Right.
It had no scripture. I mean, sometimes Homer's, Iliad and Odyssey were taken as sort of kind of scriptural. I mean, they have a lot of, stuff about the gods in them. The works of Hesiod are sometimes thought to be a kind of scripture, but there were really no official scriptures in Greco-Roman civilization. People people in those times practiced their religion as basically a ritual. You did this thing, you appeased the gods, and then you went about your business and lived basically a secular life.
Right.
That's the kind of religion that I have no problem with, if that's how you want to do it, especially because these religions were not exclusive. That is to say, they did not believe they held the exclusive truth about life in the universe. When the Greeks, and particularly the Romans, became essentially world conquerors, and basically, took over other nations, including as far as Persia, and up to England, the Great Britain. They found a lot of native religions, some of them primitive, some of them highly developed, and they simply absorbed those religions within their own framework. They had this sort of naive view that, oh well, this particular god equates to the god Athena, this one equates to Venus, this one equates to Zeus, whatever. It was all kind of nonsensical, but that's how they justified absorbing these religious conceptions within their own framework, and they never forced people to believe in their own religion. They just basically allowed the native religions to persist unless they proved to be a political or military danger. This is why they wiped out the Druids in Britain, and this is also why we're coming to the important thing, why they persecuted the Christians very sporadically. I'll tell you, the so-called persecution of Christians in the first 3 centuries of our era was extremely random, and it all depended on whichever emperor felt that there was something going on here that needed to be suppressed. Because the Christians at that time, before they gained control of the Roman Empire under Constantine, refused to swear to the emperor. The emperor cult itself became a facet of the Roman religion. When Augustus became the first emperor of Rome. That was a way that the Romans felt was kind of a unifying factor in this very diverse body of people that they now controlled, from England to the Middle East and Africa as well.
Yes.
The emperor worship was the one sort of stabilizing factor that they felt needed to be practiced to ensure some sort of unity. But of course, the Christians couldn't do that. That was against their religion. They can only worship their own God. That's fine. But so the Romans felt that the Christians were politically dangerous at times, but again, very sporadically so. And the funny thing is that the Romans, they of course, the Romans encountered the Greeks, and the Romans encountered the Jews as well in Palestine and elsewhere. They actually allowed the Jews to practice their religion relatively unhindered, even though the Jews would also not be willing to swear to the emperor. But they made an exception for the Jews because they were such small numbers that it didn't affect them. Whereas, unfortunately, Christianity was spreading like wildfire in the first several centuries of the Common Era.
You got something?
Oh yeah, I was just going to say that that's very fascinating about how the Romans and Greeks just kind of enveloped different cultures. Do you think that the main difference or the factor that played in was the polytheism versus the monotheism of Christianity, where there is the one God, it's like my way or the highway, whereas polytheism, maybe this God is better for this day,
No different.
That's right. In the Greeks and the Romans, their system essentially is Zeus or Jupiter, the same god, was kind of the head god, but apparently he couldn't control the gods very well. Venus was doing this thing, or Athena, or Apollo, and Poseidon, and they all had their own agendas.
Yeah.
So yeah, there was no omnipotent single god that controlled everything. And of course, some philosophers, even at the time, said, "Oh, some of these gods are really behaving in a very immoral manner. There's Zeus. Poor suffering wife of Hera had to endure his gallivanting with various human women, and producing offspring with them, whether by being a bull or a shower of gold or
Or
whatever."
the swan.
Swan.
I still cannot.
Swan.
Lita and
Yeah,
the
right,
swan.
yeah, right,
No.
I'm not sure how you impregnate a human woman in a shower of gold, but whatever. That's why we did those Greek myths are gorgeous. I'll tell you, when Lovecraft discovered those myths when he was like 5 or 6 years old, he was so overwhelmed, and I can understand why. The Greeks had this incredible aesthetic sense for beauty, and extended into their religion as well. Just amazing. But anyway, yeah, there is something to be said that polytheism does not conduce toward dogmatism, shall we say. But unfortunately, the monotheism of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, which I go into a bit, because of course Islam will have an effect on the West at various points, are exclusive. They are totalizing, and if you don't believe them, well, you're in trouble. Although initially Islam was not did not suppress other religions. It too, for a while, allowed other nations or other groups to practice what they wished. At a later stage, they did start to clamp down on that, but only a little later.
Yeah. So I'm assuming, I mean, you also have to go into this, I guess, when the politics of all this at the time. But it's, I guess, yeah, how it seems to me very interesting to think about how did Christianity spread like this wildfire? How did it grow from this? I mean, this cult that was very small when it first started.
Yeah, well,
I
believe I mentioned to you my personal belief, and I've been convinced by a number of treatises on this subject, that Jesus Christ never existed.
Right. Yeah.
This is what is called the Christ myth theory. It has been around for several centuries. Not a majority view by any means. In fact, if you look at the Wikipedia entry on this subject, you will find a bunch of theologians, today saying, "Oh well, you couldn't get away believing this thing, in any theological department in America." Well, of course not.
Kind of defeats the purpose.
Because your job, you wouldn't get hired for one thing. Theologians have a vested interest in subscribing to the reality of Jesus. I made the analogy. If there was a guy who believed that football ought to be banned because it is, physically dangerous to the players, I very much doubt that this guy will be hired as a football coach.
It doesn't compute.
Similarly, with somebody who says, "Oh yeah, I don't believe in the reality of Jesus Christ," he's not going to be hired by the Princeton Theological Seminary. I very much doubt it.
Right.
So there you are. Robert M. Price, the great Lovecraft scholar, has also written on this subject in 2 really good books, which I recommend. One of them is called Deconstructing Jesus. That doesn't fully embrace the Christ myth theory, but his second book, called The Incredible Shrinking Jesus, does.
That title.
Beautiful title. I love that title. Anyway, so and there's a book by Earl Doherty called The Jesus Puzzle that I also got a lot of things out of. Anyway, I subscribe to this view. We won't go into how this happened, but basically the very short version of the story is that a certain group of Jewish people in Palestine at the time, right around the beginning of our Christian era, so-called, were chafing under Roman rule and were looking for a savior, somewhat like Moses back in the day. And I'm sorry to report that Moses never existed either. The Exodus never happened. Believe me, scholars of Judaism admit this. There's actually very little debate about that. It never happened. Moses as a figure was invented about 800 years after his supposed existence, during the Babylonian captivity of the Jews, and they were similarly looking for a savior, and they sort of predated him back in the day, as a sort of an example of how some guy could lead them out of captivity. Similarly, the Jews at that time, around the first century, did the same thing and basically invented a person named Jesus Christ.
Right.
Won't go into that, but and other people have expounded this view much better than I can. I only devote like 20 pages to it, but it is my view. But the point is that this view is very attractive. What happens is that most Greco-Roman religion and even Judaism early on did not have much to do with an afterlife. I mean, yes, the Greeks thought there was something called the Elysian Fields, and then for where the nice people go, and then the bad people go into some place called Hades. But it was not very stressed. That was just whatever. But the Christians held out the hope, that if you're a good person, you can go to heaven and live forever, playing your harp and whatever. That was very enticing, because people's lives were so wretched, most people had nothing, and
Life
so
was short.
you could tempt them to envision a much better life after they were dead. So that was just one of the reasons why Christianity spread. There were many other reasons, but it just sort of built. And Christian, believe me, the Christians were proselytizers. Jews were not, for the most part. Christians even at that early stage, they wanted to spread the word everywhere. That was Paul's major function. He took Christianity out of this small circle of Judaism and broadcast it to the world throughout the Greco-Roman world.
Right.
Whatever. So there we are. And then eventually, I personally think by a series of accidents, historical accidents, the Emperor Constantine kind of embraced Christianity. I think actually for political or military reasons, but we got stuck with it, and we're still stuck with it. But believe me, I wouldn't say it's on the way out, but it's Christianity has been tamed and defanged, if I may say so.
Literally.
Mostly in the course of the 18th and 19th centuries, when it got kicked out of government. And that was huge. That is huge. And we as Americans can take great pride, and we should take great pride in the fact that we are the first nation on earth to have explicitly pushed religion aside out of government. The French followed us during the French Revolution, and then throughout the 19th century, most of the European nations basically produced a tentative, or at least informal, separation of church and state. They didn't clamp down on the church. They said, "Oh, you can believe whatever you want to," but they kicked religion out of control of education, which was enormous. They kicked it out of the ability to fine or imprison or kill people for heresy, even though I will say that in England, which has no First Amendment, the crime of what is called blasphemous libel remained on the books, albeit unenforced, until 2008. You could still be prosecuted for blasphemous libel, which means saying bad things about the Bible or God, all the way up to 2008. Now it hadn't been practiced, had nobody come to trial for a century. It was not taken off the books until 2008. But anyway, no matter. But basically, Europe and even here, with all the fulminations of the Christian right, Christianity has been kicked out of government, and it's to everyone's benefit that it be so.
Right.
Yeah.
No,
because we've got time for maybe one more question. Did you have a burning question?
Well, go ahead. Go ahead.
Mine's not a burning question.
Well, I don't care. It's not burning.
Okay. But no, because when all your research, did you have anything just like that it was still in the books till 2008, the libel, or was there anything in all your research that you came across that you were like, this is really weird, or just like a fun fact or something that surprised you?
Oh man, there's so many. I mean, I tell you, I learned a huge amount from this book. I mean, my investigation of this subject had been very sporadic. I did a lot of research, of course, back in my college days on Greco-Roman civilization, and then I sort of skipped the whole Middle Ages, from basically like from 400 to 1500. It's like that's boring, stupid, nothing's going on there. And then started with the Renaissance, and even then, my understanding was spotty at times. So I've learned a huge amount. I mean, every day I feel like my brain is expanding from all this stuff that I'm learning. And I'm even going into like literature and art and music, and that's important too, because that affected culture way more than the than some philosopher writing in his study.
Yeah.
I mean, you have writers like Ambrose Bierce and Stephen Crane and so many others. Walt Whitman I wouldn't say a unbeliever, but he was highly unorthodox in his take on what he called God.
Yeah.
All these writers out there, so many of them are free thinkers, and it's tremendously enlightening to me to see how all this has developed over the centuries.
Right. Yeah. I think that's why it'd be so fascinating to read, to be able to, because I know it is such an enormous subject, but I'm sure that when you were going through this, I mean, your style is so engaging. I can't imagine that it wouldn't, take everybody through the material pretty,
Yeah. I mean,
pretty
I
speedy.
regret to say that as I go over volume 2, which is already almost the size of volume 1, and I still have the whole 20th and 21st centuries to go,
Right.
I may have to do a little condensation. Oh, it'll hurt me because this stuff is so interesting. I mean, believe me,
Yeah.
I maybe I should have gone to 3 volumes, but then I think the publisher would have
I was going to
squashed
say
that.
that. Yeah.
I was gonna. It sounds like you need
That might be too
volume
much,
3.
but I'll tell you, there's so much there, and I can't actually wait to get to the 20th century when I can tackle some of my favorite people like Lovecraft and H.L. Mencken and Clarence Darrow and Dawkins, of course, the so-called new atheists and
Now
whatnot. It's funny though; those new atheists haven't done a whole lot lately. That's why I think this book might have some minimal effect of sort of bringing this whole subject back into prominence.
And we should also recommend to people, if they haven't read your book, The Unbelievers, The Evolution of Modern Atheism. That's another, that work
Yeah,
covers a lot of
that was sort of a trial run for this book, but on a much smaller scale. I just have individual chapters on 10 or 11 thinkers, including Gore Vidal. I love Gore Vidal, by the way. He was a great guy. I knew him personally, slightly, very slightly. And people like Mark Twain. He was a real free thinker and real nose thumber of religion. Just so many others. Thomas Henry Huxley. He was a great guy. Oh, Darwin's Bulldog. He
Yeah.
was fun. He really gave it to them. Anyway. There was just so much to cover, but
Yeah, well,
Absolutely.
thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to talk with
Yeah.
us. Can you say again that you expect it to come out in November with
the
what
publisher has announced November. I'm hoping might be early. I haven't seen any proofs yet, so that'll probably be about right. But that's what he said, and I intend to submit the second volume to him before that, and I hope he can schedule that for next year, maybe the year after. Who knows? It all depends. But
Well, I'm
yeah,
definitely, yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to reading this one. So when the second one comes out, if you want to do a chat about that, we'd love to do that too, and catch up
absolutely.
with you on that one. So,
I'm always here.
well, yeah,
Yeah,
well, we thank you so much for
yeah,
your time,
thank
ST, and
you.
I look forward to reading that. So I can't
Good
wait
thing.
till it comes out.
Okay.
Sure thing.
Right. Well, thank you.
Mhm.